This video is going to be my first preview of the Lions-Seahawks Monday Night Football matchup in Week 4. This is two physical, tough, and I think well-balanced football teams, well-coached as well, obviously. They're going to collide in Detroit for the third year in a row, in fact. They have a history of high-scoring games against one another, but there's this dual dynamic that's happening where both of these teams boast talented defenses so far in 2024. Nonetheless, that are each trying to navigate significant injuries up front, generally in the front 6 or 7. The Seahawks are going to show up with a 3-0 record, a defense that's surging under Mike Macdonald, boasting, additional to that, 3 wins over the Lions, I think, in the last 30 months, including scoring a ton of points over that time, 51 points, 48, and 37. 2 of those wins, the last 2, have been in Detroit. But the defense they're going to encounter for the Lions is drastically different. Lions fans know this. Those of us who try to analyze the game realize this as well. Talent upgrades in the secondary and in the front 6 or 7 for the Lions. Unfortunately, they've suffered 2 significant injuries, but nonetheless, the Seahawks have won 5 straight in this matchup. Like I said, 2 in a row in Detroit. The reality is, while the Seahawks defense is very different in structure and perhaps output from last year, they're allowing 14.3 points per game while going 3 in a row. Detroit has similarly transformed its talent and depth on the defensive side of the ball. One thing I wanted to note that I found out, I think 2 weeks ago, is that when Mike Macdonald was hired, or shortly thereafter, he brought in longtime NFL coach Leslie Frazier, who formerly the defensive coordinator of the Bills. And for some of you who aren't as old as I am, you may not know, he actually played corner for the Bears in the 80s when they had perhaps the greatest defense of all time. I think he had 6 or 7 interceptions that season. So a badass defensive back in the NFL as well. Adding Macdonald as a head coach and defensive play caller is amazing, but I did not know that they also had Leslie Frazier there as an assistant head coach. I think that's a unique element for not just this game, but that Seahawks team in general. We'll let some film flow through here to kind of illustrate some of the things I'm talking about. I'm not necessarily going to break down every play. I think the rematch aspect of this is twofold, or perhaps even more than that. Obviously, you have the Seahawks coming to Detroit again, this time in a high-profile primetime game, but also the rematch of Ben Johnson and Mike Macdonald. Everyone knows what Mike Macdonald's defense did to the Lions in Week 7 when they visited the Ravens last year. Having Frazier around as well is an interesting twist to this because you're talking about a guy who oftentimes played as a coordinator, that is, out of a too-high safety structure and has a classic defensive mind to kind of meld or merge with Mike Macdonald, who is also, I would say, a split safety or too-high safety structure guy. We will cover Seattle's defense here first. I have significant film of them to this point. Their secondary is celebrated widely, as well they should be. But I think their front 6 or 7 is also incredibly physical. Now I'm referring to when they are completely healthy. They've got a ton of big guys who get after the football in the run game and attack the quarterback on pass concepts. Boye Mafe, one of my favorite players across the NFL. Derek Hall's an underrated guy, getting perhaps a lot more reps now that Uchenna Nwosu's been injured, I think, since week 1. Leonard Williams, the huge and kind of freakishly fast and strong defensive tackle. All those guys are well known, but look, everything is integrated well with this defense. Yes, they are allowing 14 3 points per game. That draws attention, rightfully so. I think it's 3rd in the league or maybe 4th. But hidden among that is a stat that I think is interesting. They're currently 3rd best in the NFL in passing yards allowed. Quarterbacks are completing just 60% of their passes against the Seahawks. It's a total so far of 473 yards. Now, there are those who will say, and I will readily admit, that they have faced Bo Nix in his rookie debut, Jacoby Brissett, who perhaps may not be the starter by the end of the season for New England, and then Skylar Thompson as the backup for the Dolphins. That's cool. I recognize that that is reality. But those numbers, low passing yards per attempt, low completion percentage, they line up precisely with Mike Macdonald's defense in Baltimore in 2023 and also for a large part of 2022. He's going to mix up coverages and force quarterbacks to process things post-snap and hold on to the ball slightly longer. And as a result, the pass rush will have a little bit longer to get there, 0.2, 0.3 seconds, in some cases as much as 0.4. The Seahawks at this point have 11 sacks through 3 games. including 3 each from Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. Both of those guys, big, explosive outside linebackers out on the edge. They attack. 6'3", 6'4", in the 260-pound range. Huge, but very fast. Their 11 sacks, I think, are tied for 4th or 5th in the NFL. Additional to that, they've only given up 1 passing touchdown so far. The reason why I quote all those things to you is it lines up very neatly with how the Baltimore Ravens defense played in 2023. It's obvious that Reek Woolen, and Devin Witherspoon, they're popular players with great reputations around the NFL, and that's deservedly so. But their safeties are also playing at an extremely high level, if you ask me. Rayshon Jenkins, Julian Love are out there balling from multiple alignments. Backups are other guys that get involved. Kayvon Wallace, a little bit more than Kobe Bryant, but those guys are illustrative of the fact that this is a deep secondary. They are expected by McDonald and the defensive staff to execute a multitude of coverages on command, meaning you may not have executed a particular coverage, and we're now in the middle of the second quarter. Suddenly we're going to ask you to execute it, and Mike McDonald's group does that. They do. With Baltimore, there was a stretch early in 2022, maybe the first 3 or 4 games, where there were times where the coverage was not streamlined for the right and left side, but eventually they got those problems fixed and really started to be a dominant defense, and in 2023 just continued almost exponentially. So one thing I want to talk about a little bit, I'm not necessarily going to illustrate it here, is the dynamic of Witherspoon and Woolen as it relates to alignment. So I'm not sure how often this has been mentioned by other people in previews. I'll try to explain my point here, and then in the comment section as this premieres, I'll explain it further. Basically, along with all the coverage variability that Mike McDonald offers, which everyone tries to do to a certain extent as a defensive coordinator or defensive head coach in the NFL, meaning make the post-snap windows look different, totally different in some cases than the pre-snap. That's the game. Trying to obscure the look for the quarterback and then slow down his post-snap processing. But along with that, there's another layer to this that I want to try to peel back or at least make you aware of. Maybe other people have covered it to more depth than I have. You have a very real aspect of Witherspoon and Woolen's own physical location on the field in terms of their alignment. Quarterback's got a lot to deal with. This is an underrated element, if you ask me. So depending on your personnel group for your offense, 21 personnel, 11 personnel, 12, whatever, McDonald's coverage call is going to flow from that. We all get it. But the pre-snap alignment of these guys is going to change. If it's base defense, generally, Reek Woolen is going to be to the defense's right, the offense's left. And Witherspoon's going to be the outside corner to the defense's left, the offense's right. That all changes when McDonald goes to his nickel look. Witherspoon becomes the nickel defender. Trey Brown, who is a very good corner as well, he had a pick 6 last year in Detroit in the Seahawks 37-31 win. He becomes the left outside corner. Witherspoon becomes the nickel, but it gets a little bit more complicated than that. In the nickel sets on defense, they'll move to Reek Woolen around. Sometimes he'll be to the left. Sometimes he'll be to the right. Sometimes he'll be to the boundary. There is a level of unpredictability there, just in terms of their pre-snap alignment, that the quarterback has to handle. Goff, in my opinion, has his hands full in trying to deal with all of this from a pre-snap alignment standpoint, depending on the personnel. Maybe Ben Johnson can or has, at this point, figured out a way to dictate. I think the running game is going to be a huge factor. And I have to say that with all the injuries that the Seahawks defense has, that there is a chance Detroit can go out there and get a lot done on the ground. The Seahawks gave up 185 in their Week 2 win over the Patriots, 23-20 road win. But there again, injuries also are impacting the Lions' offense. Frank Ragnow, their center, is out for a while, perhaps out for a week or two with a torn pec. He actually played through it, I guess, in last week's win over Arizona, 20-13. My point in mentioning all this is where you have players out for one team, you also have almost this alignment of the corresponding matchup having an injury for the opponent. I'm talking about this matchup in Week 4. But the Seahawks are still, it's a fact, giving up 4.4 yards per carry and they've also allowed 23 first downs on the ground. If you compare that to the Lions are only allowing 3.6 yards per carry, but if you break that down a little further, and I'm getting a little data heavy here, so forgive me for that. If you break that number down a little further for the Lions, here it is. Running backs through 3 games have 50 carries against Detroit. They've produced 129 yards. Now, I went in and did all that calculation myself, so if the math is wrong, I apologize. But you get the idea, I think. Based on my calculations, that's 2.6 yards per carry for running backs. You're just not going to survive, or thrive, I should say, running the ball consistently against Aaron Glenn's defense when they're totally healthy. Now, the losses of Marcus Davenport and Derek Barnes, who is extremely underrated, does impact that dynamic. How much? We'll see. So as much as there is to say about Seattle's defense, I think the Lions' defense actually matches up. They're allowing 17 points per game, which is way down from last year in 2023. They give up just over 28 points per game. They were really good against the run last year. Dominant so far. Aaron Glenn's group is allowing 80 yards per game on the ground. Like I said before, 3.6 yards per carry. But out of that total output, up 230 total rushing yards through 3 games, quarterbacks have accounted for a third of it. Baker Mayfield had a rushing touchdown on a designed quarterback draw. Up the middle against the Lions, kind of caught everybody by surprise. He had 34 yards in that Week 2 win in Detroit. Kyler Murray last week had a 13-yard run and a 21-yard scramble. He had 45 yards on the ground. So a third of the rushing output comes from quarterbacks. Now, Geno Smith did have 2 scrambles against the Lions last year, perhaps a third that I think got called back for a penalty. And with the type of guys that Detroit may have to put out there at defensive end or outside linebacker on their right, because we can assume Aiden Hutchinson is going to be on the left, going against Steve Forsythe, the third-string tackle at this point. 2 big losses, if you ask me, for the Lions defense over there to the right with Davenport and Barnes. I'm going to let some Lions run defense cut-ups flow through here. Seattle does counter with a number of guys that are out or question marks at this point, as I do my research on Friday night and then into Saturday morning. I usually wait until Fridays to get my previews done, and here's why. I want to wait and see the injury or practice reports for Friday. There's a lot of talent that's either out for these 2 defenses or didn't practice this week at all. Apparently the Seahawks did a walkthrough on Friday, so perhaps some of those guys who even did participate in that would not have done so if it had been a regular practice. For the Lions, Marcus Davenport out with a torn tricep, out for the year supposedly. You know, that's the type of injury you could see a 2-month return from, depending on how it heals and what route he chooses to go. Derek Barnes, I mentioned before, I think it's a shoulder injury. Brian Branch was in the protocol for a concussion. Aleem McNeil was unsure, but both of those guys were full practice on Friday, which was not a walkthrough apparently. Seattle's situation just as serious as I mentioned before. Uchenna Nwosu, I think, has been out since week 1. Boye Mafe hasn't practiced this week to my knowledge. Big player for them out on the edge. Byron Murphy, the first-round pick at defensive tackle, out. Leonard Williams didn't practice either. So much talent for both of these teams listed as did not participate. Apparently there's reporters who projected whether Seahawks guys would have practiced if it was a full practice. I don't know the status of guys like Jerome Baker. He didn't practice either. Mafe, Williams, Jerome Baker not practicing is ominous, if you ask me, because they are known they're reliable performers. So maybe Mike McDonald and that staff held them out because they know what they're going to get out of those guys. I'm really talking about Mafe and Leonard Williams. Another thing to mention, as a Ravens content creator, Ravens fan, is that the Seahawks did elevate outside linebacker Tyus Bowser earlier in the week from the practice squad. That could be related to Mafe's status. I don't know. I do think that the Lions' losses of Davenport and Barnes are similarly gaping holes as what Seattle is going to play without potentially. And I understand that Seahawks fans may not agree with that. Davenport's a big, nasty edge defender who's played well through 3 games. Barnes is extremely versatile in coverage to the boundary generally and against the run. He's playing way better than PFF gives him credit for. At this point, I have seen the gradings or ratings for him, and I find them laughable. Generally, my guess would be is that they're grading Barnes on his pass rush moves, which is not what he's on the field for the most part. McNeil and Branch back at practice, so good to hear. I think if these defenses were fully healthy, they would flip the dynamic of this matchup. And what I mean is the last 3 games, whereby someone has scored, over 35 points in each matchup. And in fact, last year, 37-31. If they were totally healthy, I think you're looking at a game that's 23-20, 24-21 at most. I think that highly of both of these defenses when they are fully healthy. If you recall, Seattle went into Detroit and won 48-25 in a crazy game in Week 2 of 2022. Like I said, 6-point win, scoring 37 last year, even though the Lions had a 14-7 lead and the ball to start the third quarter. You recall Goff threw a pick six directly to Trey Brown. In the first play of the third quarter, Montgomery fumbled the ball away. Seahawks were able to flip that 14-7 deficit to a 21-14 lead, and eventually it was 31-21 halfway through the fourth. Geno Smith tore him up. 75% completion percentage, 328 yards, 2 touchdowns. Seahawks won last year despite Kenneth Walker III and Zach Charbonnet combining for just under 60 yards rushing. If that's the number that they are producing this Monday, I think the Seahawks have an uphill climb against this defense. The talent upgrade for Detroit is significant. If you're a Seahawks fan and you don't know, adding DJ Reed or Marcus Davenport, and then multiple DBs, Ennis Rakestraw Jr., Terrion Arnold, Carlton Davis III, you just can't replicate that from a Lions perspective with Malcolm Rodriguez or Ben Neiman playing out there on the edge, or even James Houston IV trying to replace Marcus Davenport. I suspect that the guys opposite Aiden Hutchinson are probably going to be by committee. Levi Onwuzurike, James Houston IV, perhaps. Neiman or Newman, however you say his name, I could see him lining up out there as well. Look, Onwuzurike's been playing really well. It seems to pair up Onwuzurike on rundowns. James Houston IV would seem like the obvious choice on passing downs based on what's available. I think it depends on the hash as well. This is going to sound crazy, and then I'll get into some Hutchinson film here in a moment. If the ball is on the left hash for Seattle's offense, meaning the right side of Detroit's defense, their right tackle situation is dire in Seattle. So Hutchinson's going to be over there to the left, to the field side against their third-string right tackle. Probably going to have to chip or use a running back to deal with him, or at least threaten a chip. That inside spin move is sick. Steve Forsythe, some of the film from last week, really, I thought looked pretty good, better than I remembered, at least, from watching the game. But that situation, I think, with Abraham Lucas out and then George Fant is now on IR, it puts a serious damper in what Seattle's able to get accomplished in the run game and the pass game. And I think that lines up well with Detroit's strength, which is shut down or stop or significantly slow down the run game and force you to throw the ball a lot, which so far this year has been a number of underneath completions or tightly contested windows that in some cases have resulted in illegal contact or defensive pass interference penalties on the Lions DBs. So it's pretty ridiculous so far what Aiden Hutchinson's been able to accomplish. 6.5 sacks, 11 quarterback hits. Those 6.5 sacks lead the NFL, having an unbelievable season. Look, and Onwuzurike is surging. If you ask me, he has a sack. But other than those two, no one who will be active on Monday night has produced a sack. It's a crazy situation, if you ask me, for both teams to have so many injuries. And again, I think that there's almost this balancing out or canceling out of the injuries in terms of the matchups, the guys that are going to be competing against each other. But for the foreseeable future for Detroit's pass rush, it's going to be, I think, probably the most interesting dynamic on their team. Davenport and Onwuzurike have 4 quarterback hits each. Hutchinson has 11. The rest of Detroit's roster has a total of 2. How do they handle the loss of Davenport and Barnes, who was not known as a pass rush guy, and nor should he be, because I don't think that's his relative strength at all? Do the Lions go back to their strategy from late 2023 of bringing heavy pressure, blitzing safeties? If you're a Seahawks fan and you don't know, they made a living off of blitzing Brian Branch, Ifeatu Melifonwu, who's also been out for a while and would be on the field a significant amount of time. They did that so that the coverage guys, who were poor and below average for the most part, didn't have to cover very long. Now it's way better than it has been in recent years. I mean, I would say, just based on my surface level understanding of Detroit Lions history, I would say that this is the best defense they've had since, I think, 2015. The DBs might be more stressed now, however. the Lions, I think absolutely need Hutchinson to dominate. It would not surprise me at all if you saw a dedicated chip, almost double team against Hutchinson often, for someone else to win. Aleem McNeil can win. Aleem McNeil is a very talented defensive tackle who a lot of people across the league may not even know his name or know much about him. The Lions need someone else besides Hutchinson to produce because of the injuries to Davenport and Derek Barnes. Some of you guys that are Lions fans know who my favorite player is, and I would like nothing more to see him step up and go on another run. But as it stands right now, Detroit needs help in the pass rush, and for their long-term sustainability in terms of their goals, they probably need to look at acquiring someone from outside the building, in my opinion. I think it'll be imperative that Aaron Glenn makes the right coverage calls or choices in terms of the blitz, because seeing how the Lions, or anyone for that matter, matches up with DK Metcalf, I think this is the most important matchup. Reducing his ability to make big plays. He's got a pair of long touchdown receptions, this 71-yarder on a beautiful little post go or dig and go, whatever you want to call it, up the right seam against the Dolphins. Like I said, 71-yard touchdown. He's got a 56-yarder against the Patriots that'll flow through here in a moment from week 2. I believe at this point he's averaging 15.4 yards per catch. He's generally drawn the best coverage corner from each team. Patrick Surtain the second in week 1, and then Christian Gonzalez in week 2. I did think that DK benefited from a number of underneath routes against Gonzalez, who, for my money, is one of the best corners that I've seen this year. But he also had a pair of really clutch catches in the fourth quarter and overtime to help the Seahawks go into New England and leave with a 23-20 win. JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, he's been extremely efficient so far. He's got 17 catches on 21 targets. He doesn't have a touchdown yet, but 81% catch percentage is pretty remarkable. Tyler Lockett is third with 13 catches, 2 of them extremely clutch situations. One against the Broncos in week 1, and the second one against the Patriots on the road in week 2. If the Lions defense is going to continue to hold teams to 20 points or less, which is what we've seen so far in 2024, they're going to win a lot of games. In order to do that this week, though, they need Hutchinson to dominate and or someone else to be able to get pass rush without sacrificing so much coverage, so much from the coverage element that they can still maintain tight coverage on Metcalf, JSN, and Lockett in the secondary. Not to discount Kenneth Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. I think they're talented running backs. They run hard, and I think they break a lot of tackles. I don't have any idea about break tackle percentage. I know that those stats exist, but I don't know what they are for those guys. I think that unless something changes with the dynamic for the Lions defense, meaning another injury during the game, I think it's a foregone conclusion that Seattle will not get much done in the run game, at least not with direct flow concepts that utilize their running backs. I mentioned it a little earlier, how ineffective running backs have been against Aaron Glenn's defense. 50 carries for 129 yards through 3 games. I think 50 carries is a big enough sample size for us to say when completely healthy, they're absolutely dominant against the run. That's what we all anticipated, particularly with DJ Reader signing there. How that dynamic changes without Davenport, who's been playing extremely well, extremely physical at minimum so far in 2024. How that dynamic changes, I don't know. I do know this. There's 2 guys who provide playmaking ability and versatility across the first 2 levels of the defense. And in some cases, in the case of Brian Branch, across all 3 levels of the defense. That's Alex Anzalone and Brian Branch. Now, they were both in the protocol. I believe actually Anzalone didn't play last week. He's a brilliant linebacker with really good coverage skills. He's also effective as a blitzer, returning from that concussion. Like I said, Branch is returning from one as well. He's in the protocol. He's the guy to me. He's got 7 passes defense so far this year. He can contribute as a blitzer. When he does blitz, he tends to just blow people up, whether it's the running back, the quarterback, or somebody else who steps to him to block him. I would say those 2 are the most versatile players in terms of their ability to cover, particularly at the second level, and be used as a blitzer while also fitting the run game very well. I think this one is going to come down to Seahawks' ability to move the ball and possibly score through the air. Detroit cannot allow big plays through the air here, in my opinion, because I think they're going to limit the run game, force Seattle to be able to execute longer drives. Not saying that they can't do that. Geno Smith does have 3 interceptions this year. There's a pass protection issue with the right tackle. I do not see Seattle being able to thrive in the run game against this Lions defense. Granted, there are significant injuries and potential injuries in this from the standpoint of Anzalone and Branch are just now returning from the concussion protocol. The final element of this is just going to be something I'm going to talk about, and that is Ben Johnson and Jared Goff versus Mike McDonald. There was a significant amount of disruption to the Lions' offensive flow last year in that Week 7 game in Baltimore. I do think that in the offseason there was probably a severe emphasis for Ben Johnson, Goff, Dan Campbell, the entire offensive staff to look at what Mike McDonald did in that game and then accumulate data. What could we have done differently? Of course, those two teams were one game away from rematching in the Super Bowl. Kind of heartbreaking for you as a Lions fan to hear that mentioned. Also heartbreaking for me because it would have been a tremendous opportunity to put out a ton of content on my part and enjoy and appreciate two teams that I was blessed enough to cover throughout the whole season. We all know how it ended. Point being, I think Detroit has done a significant amount of homework on Mike McDonald's defense, and now you have a 3-game stretch that it was their job over the course of film study Monday and Tuesday to determine how much of what Mike McDonald did to them last year is still occurring here in Seattle, meaning where's Mike McDonald playing certain coverages? The problem when dealing with Mike McDonald's defense, and I would just be flat out about this, is not only does he play multiple coverages, not only does he line up, now he's got a real multi-tool in Devin Witherspoon who can play outside corner, who can play nickel, that really adds 1 or even 2 more layers to trying to predict what the heck they're going to do on a given snap. But here's another part of it that I haven't spoken about at all yet, really, in 2024. Mike McDonald plays multiple versions of each coverage. He plays multiple versions of cover 3, at least 4 different versions. He plays multiple versions of Tampa 2, at least 2 that I'm aware of. And I'm speaking about when Kyle Hamilton was the nickel defender and then ended up post-snap being the Mike linebacker in the middle of the field. He tries to make things look like one coverage, and then post-snap it changes, it morphs into something totally different. Has Ben Johnson and Jared Goff and the Lions offensive staff been able to get a bead on those things and be able to predict them? I'm not sure. I can't answer that. What I can say is the quickest path for them to get Mike McDonald's defense in an uncomfortable situation for Seattle is to be able to run the football effectively. If the Seahawks don't have Boye Mafe and Leonard Williams, and at the time of my recording this Saturday morning, I have no idea, just going off of Friday's injury report, that's certainly a significant loss for them. On the other side of that coin, Frank Ragnow will not play. So I would presume that Sorsdahl is going to move over to center with his history of playing center, and someone else is going to play left guard. But again, I haven't seen anything updating me in terms of what the Lions might do from an offensive line standpoint. So there's a lot of question marks here. I don't give predictions because, number one, I don't feel like I'm any damn good at them. I usually try to give a range, and so that's what I'm going to do. I understand that people may think it's a cop-out. If this game is played with no turnovers and Detroit can be 130-plus in a run game, hold Seattle's running backs, not Geno Smith, because I think Geno Smith will probably get loose a couple of times, particularly if you chip and hold down Aiden Hutchinson on the right side, double team basically. If Detroit can be plus 130 and there's no turnovers on either side of the football, and they can figure out a way to hold Seattle's running backs to 60 yards or less, I think the Lions have a great chance to win this game in the 24-20 or 24-17 range, somewhere in that area. If the Lions were to go plus 1 turnover margin with those same parameters that I just gave you, plus 130 in their own rushing game, hold Seattle's running backs to less than 60 and be sound in the pass game, then maybe there's an opportunity for them to get some separation. I think people are underrating Seattle, which is crazy. For them to be 3-0, allowing 14 points per game, I think people are underrating them, and I've seen this dynamic before, whereby it occurred last year. The Ravens haven't played any quarterbacks. The Ravens feast on backup quarterbacks. And yes, there was times where people ate us up. Deshaun Watson came to Baltimore and shredded our defense in the second half. The Rams came in with their 11 personnel, unique flavor of 11 personnel, that is, under center running game, and Matt Stafford's quick processing, quick release, and strong arm gave the Ravens trouble. They scored 30-plus points and very easily could have won the game against us, barring a couple of plays in the fourth quarter that didn't go their way. My point is, I think Seattle is a better defense than people want to admit, number one. Having said that, there are things you can do. 11 personnel run game to the boundary is one of them. Force Mike McDonald to use the boundary side safety to come down and play the run, which, quote, gets him out of those too high safety looks where he retains unpredictability. Hopefully I'm explaining this in a way that makes sense. The longer Mike McDonald can retain or obscure for you as the quarterback what the coverage is going to be post-snap, the better off Seattle's defense will play. So 3rd and 7, 2nd and 8, Seattle's favor. How does Detroit avoid that or mitigate that? Get into 2nd and 5. Worst case scenario, 2nd and 6. It's going to be a challenge. I think 1st and 10 is a big moment in this game. Every time Detroit lines up on offense and it's 1st and 10, I think it's the game within the game. And I would not be surprised to see them go 11 personnel and run the ball to the boundary, number one, or go 11 personnel and invert it, basically put St. Brown into the boundary, force Mike McDonald to roll that boundary side safety down. And look, Rayshon Jenkins, Julian Love, those guys are ballers. They can play. The point isn't that Amon-Ra St. Brown or whoever is going to burn them every time. The point is reduce Mike McDonald's ability to hide or change the coverage post-snap based upon the pre-snap alignment. I didn't think Detroit did a great job of that last year in Week 7, but the Ravens were on top of them so quickly. Yes, you can attribute that win, I think it was 38-6, to Mike McDonald's defense. Cool. On the other side of the coin, Detroit went into that with some significant injuries on their defense. Their right outside corner situation, they were down to, their 3rd outside corner, Will Harris, who's now playing safety with the Saints. Just not a good fit to play outside corner. So it's a little bit of an oversimplification to say Mike McDonald's defense won the Ravens that game last year. I think simultaneously Detroit's defense and the Seahawks defense is being underrated. And maybe because of the injuries on both sides, both defenses, we do get a higher scoring game than I'm predicting. I'm thinking somewhere in the 24-21 range. That's usually what I predict, so that's a little bit of a cop-out on my part. If Seattle was to be +1 and Seattle was to run for over 100 yards with the running backs, I think that dynamic flips, and you're looking at 27-20 or maybe even 27-17 in their favor if they're able to be +1. When they tend to get a turnover, for whatever reason, it seems like guys are able to take it back to the house or get a big gain off of it. When I try to do previews here, I focus on certain elements of the game that I find important. I surely missed some. Feel free to let me know what elements or aspects of the game you think I missed in this preview. Didn't necessarily mean for it to go on this long, but I enjoy being able to cover and try to break down Ravens, Lions, and Seahawks film. So you guys give me some feedback on the preview, the quality, and the length, and the plays, and the plays that I chose to illustrate the points I was trying to make, and some of the data that I provided you in terms of Detroit's run defense and Seattle's ability to stop the pass so far through 3 games, which I think perfectly lines up with Mike McDonald's damn near historic season in 2023 in Baltimore. Appreciate you guys' time, man. If you think other Lions or Seahawks fans, for that matter, would enjoy this preview, kind of a film study, but more so just commentary. If you think other fans of both of these teams would enjoy this preview, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach. If you think I missed something or neglected an element to this game, feel free to let me know in the comment section, and I'll try to maybe follow up with a second preview Sunday or Monday morning. Appreciate you guys' time.